My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and until yesterday, I thought I was building a beautiful legacy with the man I loved. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I spent my days evaluating properties while my husband Darius played the role of a top-tier wealth management advisor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an arrogant man exactly who holds the power. My husband texted me a divorce settlement and barred me from our home. He insisted I deal exclusively with his high-powered attorney because he wanted to discard me for a younger woman with more social clout to fit his fake luxury image. So I walked right into his elite law firm. But the moment I introduced myself as his wife, his ruthless legal shark of a lawyer dropped his solid gold pen, turned completely pale, and started shaking violently. My husband had no idea who he was actually divorcing. The mahogany doors of Pierce and Associates felt heavy, but I pushed them open with a calm certainty that unsettled the receptionist. I did not wait to be announced. I walked straight down the glass-walled corridor to the senior partner corner office. When I opened the door, the scene waiting for me was perfectly staged for maximum humiliation. Darius sat lounging in a leather chair wearing one of his custom-tailored suits that I knew for a fact was bought on credit. Beside him sat Tasha. She was 24 years old, wearing a loud designer dress and a smug smile that practically screamed through her heavily glossed lips. Darius did not even have the decency to look guilty. He picked up a thick stack of legal documents and slid them across the massive conference table toward me. "I am cutting you off, Maya," Darius said. His voice carried that artificial depth he always used when trying to impress his fraternity brothers at alumni events. "Tasha has the pedigree this family needs. We are building real Black generational wealth, and your working-class mindset is dragging my brand down. Sign the papers and vacate the estate by tomorrow morning. I want your keys on this table before you leave." I looked at the documents then, at the man I had supported for 5 years. He really believed he held all the cards. He believed his meticulously crafted facade of Black excellence made him untouchable. Tasha leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands. "Darius told me you grew up in Southside Atlanta," she sneered, examining her long acrylic nails. "It is honestly inspiring that you made it this far, but you have to understand how things work at this level. You do not fit into his world. Darius needs a partner who understands luxury networking and high society, not someone who spends her days in a hard hat inspecting old buildings. But do not worry, we are going to be generous. We will let you keep your little Honda Civic. You are going to need it to get to your boring property appraisal job." Darius chuckled, wrapping his arm around Tasha. "Let us be honest, Maya. Your career is an embarrassment to my image. I am managing portfolios for the city elite, attending galas, and securing our legacy. You are busy calculating square footage in neighborhoods my clients would not even drive through. You lack vision. My mother always said I settled when I married you, and she was right. Vivian never liked you, and Kiara thinks you are entirely too aggressive. They both adore Tasha. She knows how to respect a provider." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply pulled out the chair opposite them and sat down, crossing my legs. "You are kicking me out of my own house to move your mistress and Darius. And you think handing me a Honda Civic is generous?" Before Darius could answer, the office door swung open again. Julian Pierce marched into the room. He was a man who commanded fear, known throughout Atlanta as the most ruthless senior partner in family and corporate law. He wore a scowl designed to intimidate, carrying a leather briefcase and an air of absolute superiority. He did not look at me at first. He walked directly to his high-backed chair at the head of the table, pulling out a solid gold pen from his breast pocket. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Darius," Julian said, his voice booming across the room. "Let us get this wrapped up quickly. I have a major corporate client demanding my attention this afternoon, a private equity firm that practically pays for this entire floor. Now where's the difficult wife who thinks she is entitled to your assets?" Darius smiled proudly, puffing out his chest as if being in the same room as Julian validated his false wealth. He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Julian, this is Maya, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Do not worry about her putting up a fight. She does not have the resources to drag this out." Julian finally turned his head to look at me. He expected to see a devastated working-class woman intimidated by his expensive office and aggressive demeanor. Instead, he saw me. Julian froze. The confident scowl vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked physically ill. His mouth fell open, but no words came out. The solid gold pen slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered loudly onto the marble floor, rolling away under the table. His hands began to shake violently. I smiled warmly, resting my elbows on the table. "Hello, Julian. I must say I am quite surprised. I certainly did not expect to see you here today. It is truly fascinating to discover that the senior legal partner, my firm pays a $2 million annual retainer to his moonlighting as a divorce lawyer for my cheating husband." Darius frowned, looking back and forth between his terrified lawyer and my calm expression. "What are you talking about, Maya? What firm?" Julian swallowed hard, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead. He gripped the edge of the table as if trying to keep himself from collapsing. "Miss Sterling," he stammered, his voice completely stripped of its former arrogance. "I had no idea. I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea this was your husband." The intake form simply said Darius Sterling. "I never connected the name to you. Please, you have to believe me." Tasha looked utterly confused. "Darius, what is going on? Why is your fancy lawyer apologizing to her?" I kept my eyes locked on Julian, watching him squirm under the weight of his colossal mistake. "You should really pay closer attention to your client intake files, Julian. Vantage Holdings is your most lucrative corporate client. We acquire distressed assets, liquidate failing companies, and fund the expansion of this very law office. As the president and sole shareholder of Vantage Holdings, I personally sign the checks that keep your firm afloat. So you can imagine my disappointment when I find out you are using my money to help my husband try to leave me homeless." Julian jumped up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled over backwards. He looked at Darius with absolute fury and panic. "Darius, I am dropping you as a client immediately. I cannot represent you. This is a massive conflict of interest. I will not be part of this proceeding. Get out of my office." Darius stood up, his face contorted in shock. "Julian, you cannot do this. I paid you a retainer. You promised you would destroy her." "I will refund every single penny by the end of the hour," Julian practically shouted, pointing towards the door. "You are on your own. I am not losing my biggest corporate account over your messy divorce. Miss Sterling, I sincerely apologize. Vantage Holdings has my complete loyalty." I picked up the solid gold pen from the floor and placed it neatly on the divorce settlement. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and signed my name on the dotted line with elegant, deliberate strokes. I tossed the signed papers directly into Darius's chest. They scattered across his expensive suit and fluttered to the ground. "You wanted a divorce, Darius. You have got it. But you just made a fatal legal error today. You brought a tiny knife to a massive gunfight, and you did not even realize I own the entire ammunition factory. I highly suggest you go back to our house and pack your bags very quickly right now. You and your pathetic mistress are going to need a massive, uncatchable head start before I take absolutely everything that you both have left." I did not wait for Darius to formulate a miserable response to my declaration. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of that opulent corner office with my head held high, leaving the two cheating cowards and their terrified former lawyer sitting in absolute stunned silence. The drive back to my expansive Buckhead estate took exactly 25 minutes. I used that quiet time in the luxury of my car to mentally prepare myself for the next phase of my meticulously calculated extraction. Darius actually thought he had blindsided me with this sudden divorce. In reality, I had been eagerly waiting for him to make a foolish, arrogant move for several months. When I pulled my car onto the pristine cobblestone driveway of the sprawling brick mansion, the grand front double doors were already standing wide open. I stepped out of my vehicle and walked up the grand stone steps, immediately hearing the chaotic sounds of heavy footsteps and loud, entitled voices echoing from the second-floor master suite. I slowly ascended the sweeping spiral staircase and stood quietly in the doorway of my own bedroom. The scene unfolding before me was entirely predictable, but still deeply pathetic to witness. My mother-in-law, Vivian, and my 26-year-old sister-in-law, Kiara, were tearing through my massive walk-in closet like wild, desperate scavengers. Vivian was aggressively shoving my expensive custom-tailored business suits into heavy black plastic garbage bags. Kiara was standing directly in front of my vanity mirror, draped in one of my pure silk robes, casually admiring herself while holding 3 of my authentic designer handbags over her arm. "Well, look who finally decided to show up to her own eviction," Vivian sneered, catching my reflection in the mirror. She dropped a handful of my shoes into a trash bag and turned to face me, placing her hands firmly on her hips. "Darius called me from the law office right before your meeting started. He told me to come over here immediately and start packing up your trash. You are out, Maya. He is finally done pretending to be happy with a woman who completely lacks grace and proper pedigree." Kiara smirked proudly, swinging my expensive leather bags over her shoulder. "I am keeping these, by the way," she announced with absolute unearned arrogance. "Consider them my rightful compensation for having to put up with your terrible, aggressive attitude at every single family holiday for the past 5 years. You never deserved true luxury anyway. Tasha is going to look so much better carrying these to our elite alumni galas." I crossed my arms over my chest and leaned casually against the wooden doorframe. "You two really rushed over here to dig through my personal belongings like common thieves. Does your elite society church committee know that their esteemed president spends her Tuesday afternoons bagging up her daughter-in-law's clothes?" Vivian narrowed her eyes, her face twisting with bitter contempt. "Do not you dare speak to me with that disrespectful tone. You are standing inside a sterling family legacy. This magnificent estate represents generations of Black excellence, wealth, and undeniable power. It was built for a woman who can properly uphold our prestigious name and provide strong, healthy heirs to carry on the sterling bloodline. We tolerate absolutely no barren women in this proud family. You could not even give my son a child to secure his future. You are completely useless to us. Tasha is already pregnant, Maya. She is giving us the ultimate blessing you were physically incapable of providing." The cruelty in her voice was entirely meant to shatter me. She fully expected me to collapse onto the floor, weeping over my alleged infertility and the devastating loss of my marriage. She desperately wanted to see me broken, humiliated, and begging for a tiny shred of sympathy. Instead, I reached into my tailored pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped a single pre-written text message to the private security team waiting at the neighborhood gate. "Send them in now." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked Vivian directly in her hateful eyes. "You truly think this house is a sterling family legacy, Vivian? You genuinely believe your son is a powerful provider securing generational wealth for his new pregnant mistress?" Before Vivian could respond, the heavy sound of synchronized footsteps echoed through the downstairs foyer. The noise grew louder, ascending the grand staircase like a military battalion. Within seconds, a team of 20 massive professionally uniformed movers flooded into the master bedroom hallway. They were led by a stern supervisor holding a thick metal clipboard. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, looking directly at me. "We are ready to commence the extraction protocol as you requested." I nodded gracefully. "Thank you, gentlemen. Please begin with the guest bedrooms down the hall and then remove everything belonging to the 2 women standing in this room. Pack it all securely and place it directly onto the front lawn." Vivian gasped, her eyes darting between me and the imposing wall of moving men. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot order movers into my son's house. I will call the police right now and have you arrested for trespassing." I took a slow, deliberate step into the room, forcing Vivian to back up against the closet door. "Go ahead and call the police, Vivian. But while you dial those numbers, let me educate you on the actual reality of your precious family legacy. Darius lied to you. He lied to Kiara. He lied to his entire wealthy fraternity network. This magnificent estate you are so fiercely defending was completely foreclosed on 3 years ago." Kiara dropped one of my designer bags, her mouth falling open in total shock. "You are a liar. My father bought this house. Your late husband gambled away the entire mortgage." "Vivian," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy register. "He secretly took out massive loans against this property to fund his severe gambling addiction, and when he died, he left Darius drowning in massive unpayable debt." The bank was literally 3 days away from seizing this property and throwing you both out onto the street in front of your entire high society church committee. You would have been the absolute laughingstock of Atlanta. Vivian shook her head frantically, her hands trembling. No, Darius paid off the debt. He told me his wealth management investments covered everything. Darius did not have a single dime to his name, I corrected her sharply. I bought this house. I purchased this entire estate entirely in cash through a blind limited liability company to save your precious social standing and protect Darius's fragile public ego. I am the sole legal owner of this property. Your son just pays the monthly utility bills so he can feel like a big, powerful provider. You are currently standing inside my house, breathing my air and holding my garbage bags. The sheer weight of the truth hit Vivian like a physical blow. Her knees buckled slightly and she had to grab Kiara's arm to keep from falling over completely. The 20 professional movers did not hesitate. They swarmed into the room, efficiently grabbing the plastic bags Vivian had packed and aggressively taking the designer bags right out of Kiara's hands. Hey, do not touch me, Kiara shrieked, batting at a mover who was firmly guiding her toward the bedroom exit. Maya, tell them to stop. You cannot just throw us out like trash. You came into my home to pack my life into garbage bags, I replied coldly. I am simply returning the exact same energy. Gentlemen, clear them out right now. The movers systematically herded Vivian and Kiara down the grand spiral staircase. I followed closely behind them, watching as my men began hauling expensive furniture, clothing racks, and framed family portraits out the front door. They dumped everything unceremoniously onto the perfectly manicured green grass of the front lawn. Neighbors walking their expensive dogs stopped on the sidewalk, openly staring and pointing at the disgraced church president and her daughter being physically removed from the estate. Vivian stood on the lawn, hyperventilating as her curated elite image shattered in real time under the bright afternoon sun. She scrambled to pull her mobile phone from her pocket, her fingers slipping frantically against the screen. She dialed Darius, putting the call on speakerphone so I could hear him order me to stop this madness. The phone rang twice before Darius answered. His voice did not carry its usual booming arrogance. It sounded thin, reedy, and absolutely laced with total panic. Darius. Vivian screamed into the phone, tears of sheer humiliation streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Maya has gone completely insane. She has hired an army of movers. They are throwing all of our belongings onto the front lawn. The neighbors are watching us. Do something immediately. Call the police and tell them she is destroying your property. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. The sound of heavy, panicked breathing echoed from the phone speaker. Mom. Darius finally choked out his voice, cracking into a desperate, high-pitched scream. I cannot do anything. I just went to the bank to get cash for Tasha. Every single one of my bank accounts has just been frozen. I do not have a single dollar left to my name. The expensive smartphone slipped right out of Vivian's perfectly manicured fingers and fell onto the pristine green grass with a heavy thud. The loud, panicked voice of her favorite son, crying about his frozen bank accounts, was abruptly cut off. This left nothing but the sound of the warm Atlanta breeze rustling through the massive oak trees. Vivian dropped to her knees right there on the expansive front lawn. She buried her face in her trembling hands as the sheer reality of her utter financial ruin finally crashed down upon her. She had spent her entire adult life carefully curating a flawless image of untouchable wealth and prestige for her high society church committee. Now she was sitting in the dirt, surrounded by cheap black garbage bags, filled with her own clothes, publicly evicted by the working-class daughter-in-law she had spent 5 long years aggressively tormenting. Kiara took one terrified look at her weeping mother and immediately decided to save herself. Loyalty had never been a strong trait in the Sterling family. She frantically grabbed the heavy set of car keys dangling from her designer belt and sprinted down the long, sweeping cobblestone driveway. She was heading straight for her pristine white Porsche Macan, which was the ultimate symbol of her unearned status. She yanked the driver door open, throwing her stolen designer handbags onto the passenger seat, desperate to speed away from the humiliating scene before any more wealthy neighbors could stop and stare. She slammed the heavy door shut and jammed her key into the ignition, desperately hoping to escape the severe consequences of her own terrible behavior. She cranked the engine and the powerful exhaust roared to life. But before Kiara could even shift the luxury vehicle into reverse, a massive heavy-duty tow truck with blinding yellow flashing lights aggressively backed right into the driveway. The sheer size of the industrial truck completely blocked her only exit path, forcing her to slam her foot onto the brake pedal. The loud hissing sound of air brakes echoed through the quiet, exclusive neighborhood as the towing operator hopped out of the cab. He was a large, no-nonsense man wearing a bright orange reflective vest and holding a thick metal clipboard. He did not say a single word to Kiara or acknowledge her frantic honking. He simply walked to the back of his truck, lowered the heavy metal towing arm, and began securing the thick steel chains directly under the front tires of her precious white Porsche. Kiara completely lost her mind. She threw her car door open and leaped out screaming at the top of her lungs with her voice echoing wildly down the affluent street. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked aggressively, pointing her finger right at the tow truck driver's face. "You cannot touch this vehicle. Do you have any idea who we are? We are the Sterling family. We represent elite black excellence in this city. My brother is a highly respected senior wealth advisor, and he will buy your entire miserable towing company just to fire you. Remove those chains from my car right now before I call the police and have you locked up for grand theft auto." The towing operator barely even blinked. He calmly tightened the heavy steel straps around her front tires. He had a job to do, and entitled screaming women did not deter him. Kiara continued to stomp her feet and scream, waving her arms frantically in the air, creating an absolute public spectacle that drew even more curious neighbors out of their massive brick houses to watch the unfolding neighborhood drama. They stood on their manicured lawns, whispering and pointing at the disgraced family. Right in the middle of Kiara's massive public tantrum, a sleek black ride-share vehicle slowly pulled up to the curb directly in front of the estate. The back door swung open, and Tasha stepped out onto the sidewalk. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and carrying a tiny, useless luxury handbag, looking incredibly smug and ready to gloat. Darius had explicitly sent his young mistress over to the house to proudly supervise my eviction. She had clearly expected to find me sobbing on the front porch, begging for mercy, while professional movers carried my meager belongings away. Instead, Tasha froze completely in her tracks. She slowly lowered her expensive sunglasses, staring in absolute stunned confusion at the chaotic scenes scattered across the sprawling front lawn. Vivian was still sitting in the dirt, weeping uncontrollably, next to a giant pile of black plastic garbage bags. Kiara was screaming wildly at a massive tow truck driver who was actively hoisting her beloved sports car up into the air. The grand front doors of the estate were wide open, but the professional movers were not carrying my things out. They were aggressively dumping the last of Kiara's gaudy furniture onto the grass, tossing it carelessly into a growing heap of rejected possessions. The heavy wooden front door swung wide open, and I stepped out onto the grand stone porch. I was holding a steaming mug of black coffee in my right hand, feeling incredibly refreshed and completely unbothered. I walked slowly down the wide brick steps, the sharp click of my heels commanding immediate attention from everyone present. I walked straight past the weeping Vivian and the confused Tasha, heading directly toward the tow truck driver. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my tailored blazer pocket and gracefully signed my name on the release form attached to his metal clipboard. I handed it back to him with a polite, firm nod, acknowledging his excellent work. "Thank you for your prompt service today," I said to the driver with a polite, warm smile. "You are very welcome, ma'am," he replied, tipping his hat before safely climbing back into the cab of his truck. Kiara spun around to face me, her eyes wide with absolute horror and burning rage. "Maya, tell him to stop right now," she demanded, her voice cracking with sheer panic as the tow truck began to slowly pull her car out of the driveway. "My brother bought me that car for my college graduation. It belongs to me. You have absolutely no legal right to let them take it away from me." I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my hot coffee and looked at Kiara with profound, chilling pity. "Kiara, did you honestly think your brother bought you that expensive luxury vehicle with his own money?" I asked, my voice calm and perfectly steady. Darius did not even have the proper credit score to lease a bicycle, let alone a brand new Porsche Macan. I personally co-signed that lease for you 2 years ago because your own financial history was absolutely abysmal. And since your wonderful brother officially filed for divorce this morning, I immediately contacted the dealership and formally removed my financial backing from your account. They were more than happy to come and repossess it today. Your credit score is just as fake as those cheap counterfeit designer bags you are holding. Kiara let out a loud, devastated wail as the tow truck successfully pulled her car right into the street and drove away, taking her entire false identity along with it. She dropped to the pavement, burying her face in her hands, completely shattered by the sudden agonizing loss of her prized possession. Tasha, finally recovering from her initial shock, decided this was the perfect moment to fiercely defend the man she thought was her wealthy provider. She strutted confidently up the driveway, placing herself directly between me and the weeping Sterling women. She crossed her arms, trying to look imposing and powerful despite the obvious destruction happening all around her. "You are just a bitter, jealous, barren older woman," Tasha said, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. "You think taking a car away makes you powerful. Darius warned me you would throw a pathetic tantrum like this when he finally left you for someone better. But you cannot touch his real wealth. He is taking me on a private trip to Dubai next week to celebrate our new life together. He already put a massive cash deposit down on a $50,000 diamond necklace for my birthday. He is a king, and he is going to make sure you walk away from this divorce with absolutely nothing." I laughed out loud. I handed my coffee mug to one of my moving supervisors and reached directly into the inside pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a folded certified financial document printed directly from my appraisal firm's highly secure database. I unfolded the thick paper and handed it directly to Tasha. "You should really learn to properly read a certified financial statement before you confidently call a man your king." "Tasha," I said, watching her eyes frantically scan the highlighted negative balances on the page. "Darius is not a millionaire. He is currently $400,000 in debt. He has been aggressively rejected for 3 different commercial business loans in the past month alone. Your entire glamorous luxury lifestyle, the expensive dinners, the fake tailored suits, the boutique hotel rooms, it is all being exclusively funded by high-interest predatory payday loans. He is drowning in massive unpayable debt. He cannot even afford to pay for a cheap rideshare back to this house right now, let alone purchase a $50,000 diamond necklace for your birthday. You are dating a broke, desperate fraud who uses my money to impress gullible young women like you." Tasha stared at the undeniable financial ledger in her trembling hands. The smug, arrogant expression completely melted off her face, instantly replaced by a look of profound, crushing realization. She looked over at Vivian, who was still crying pitifully in the grass, and then back at the legal document, proving her wealthy provider was completely bankrupt. Tasha furiously pulled her mobile phone out of her tiny purse and aggressively started typing a message, screaming aloud that she was absolutely done wasting her youth on a broke, lying loser. Just as Tasha stormed angrily away down the sidewalk to wait for her ride, my own mobile phone chimed loudly in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the bright screen. It was a text message from Darius, clearly sent in a state of absolute blind rage after realizing his mother had been evicted, his sister lost her car, and his bank accounts were entirely frozen. The message read, "You really think freezing our joint checking accounts stops me? You are completely delusional and pathetic. I still have my private offshore trust account. I am going to drain it today, and you are going to pay dearly for pulling this stunt against my family." I smiled, feeling the warm sunlight radiating wonderfully against my skin. I took my time typing a single devastating reply back to my arrogant, soon-to-be ex-husband. I wanted to make sure he understood the absolute finality of his miserable situation. I hit send, ensuring the message was perfectly clear and undeniably absolute. "Check the primary beneficiary name on that trust document, Darius. Check the precise legal wording I had you blindly sign 3 years ago. The money is already gone and you will never see a single dime of it again. Enjoy the harsh reality of your newly impoverished life. I am done playing your pathetic games. I am the true king now. I knew exactly where my soon-to-be ex-husband was heading the very moment he read my text message. While I was comfortably walking back inside my beautiful estate, Darius was aggressively storming through the heavy glass doors of the most exclusive private banking branch in downtown Atlanta. He was sweating profusely in his tailored suit, completely abandoning the refined, polished image he normally projected to the world. He bypassed the standard teller lines, shoving past wealthy clients and demanding immediate access to the senior branch manager. Darius firmly believed he still had one final safety net. He believed his secret offshore trust account would provide the massive influx of cash he desperately needed to save his crumbling facade. Secure Tasha a luxury birthday gift and rent a high-end penthouse for his newly evicted mother and sister. He barged right into the branch manager's glass-walled office without knocking, slamming his leather briefcase onto the polished desk. The manager, a quiet man named Richard, who had handled the sterling accounts for years, jumped in his seat. Darius did not even offer a polite greeting. He immediately began loudly berating the manager, aggressively asserting his heavily inflated status as a senior wealth advisor. "Listen to me very carefully," Richard Darius barked, his voice laced with pure venom and entitlement. "My bitter soon-to-be ex-wife somehow managed to freeze our joint checking and savings accounts this morning. She thinks she is playing a clever game, but she is nothing but a clueless working-class woman who does not understand how real wealth operates. I need you to immediately bypass that freeze and grant me full access to my private offshore trust. I need a cashier's check for $50,000 printed right now, and I need the rest of the funds wired directly to a new secure account that she cannot touch." Richard stared at Darius, his face completely pale. He nervously adjusted his glasses and looked down at his computer screen, refusing to make eye contact with the irate man standing before him. "Do not just sit there staring at me," Darius snapped, leaning heavily over the desk to intimidate the manager. "I am a highly respected financial advisor in this city. I represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence. I manage portfolios for athletes and corporate executives. I know exactly how these banking laws work. I spent the last 3 years systematically funneling my best commission checks and private bonuses into that hidden trust specifically, so Maya could never get her greedy hands on my hard-earned money. She was completely clueless. She spent her days walking through dusty commercial buildings in a hard hat, while I was masterfully securing my financial independence right under her nose. Now stop wasting my valuable time and access my trust." Richard took a very slow, trembling breath. He reached into his locked desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. He placed it carefully on the desk and slowly slid the heavy stack of legal trust documents across the smooth surface toward Darius. "Mr. Sterling," Richard said, his voice barely above a nervous whisper, "I cannot authorize a withdrawal from that trust. I cannot give you a cashier's check, and I certainly cannot wire any of those funds to a new account." Darius let out a harsh, arrogant laugh. "What are you talking about? I am the creator of that trust. I am the one who deposited every single dollar into it. You work for me, Richard. If you do not process this transaction in the next 5 minutes, I will call the regional director and have you fired before lunch." "You do not understand," Richard pleaded, tapping a trembling finger on the top page of the legal document. "Please just read the paperwork, Darius. Look at the primary beneficiary designation. Look at the irrevocable transfer clauses that were legally filed and notarized exactly 3 years ago." Darius snatched the documents off the desk with an angry huff. He flipped to the second page, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. He fully expected to see his own name proudly listed as the sole controller of the massive fortune he had sneaked away from our marriage. Instead, his eyes locked onto a single perfectly typed line of text that made his entire world stop spinning. "The primary sole and irrevocable beneficiary of this trust is Maya Sterling." Darius stopped breathing. His hands began to shake so violently the papers rattled. He read the line again and then again, desperately hoping his eyes were deceiving him. He flipped to the signature page. Right there at the very bottom was his own messy, hurried signature, legally binding the entire trust and every single dollar inside it directly to me. "How is this possible?" Darius choked out, the arrogant bravado completely evaporating from his body. "I never agreed to this. This is a forgery." Maya forged my signature to steal my money. Richard shook his head sadly. It is not a forgery, Darius. You signed these documents in person right here in the bank lobby 3 years ago. Your wife brought them in alongside a massive stack of your annual tax returns and corporate filing renewals. We had a public notary witness the entire transaction. The crushing realization hit Darius like a freight train. Suddenly, a very specific memory flashed through his panicked mind. 3 years ago, it was tax season. Darius had been running late for a highly exclusive golf tournament with his fraternity brothers. I had walked into his home office holding a thick stack of boring, mundane financial papers with bright yellow sticky notes marking where he needed to sign. He had been so annoyed by my interruption. He had rudely told me that he did not have time to read through basic administrative trash because he was busy building his empire. He grabbed his pen and blindly signed every single page I put in front of him, treating me like a glorified secretary who was simply managing his tedious paperwork. He had been so incredibly arrogant, so completely dismissive of my intelligence, that he did not even bother to read the bold print at the top of the trust restructuring agreement. He had legally signed away his hidden fortune, handing his entire secret safety net directly over to the clueless wife he thought he was outsmarting. She tricked me, Darius whispered, dropping the documents onto the floor. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into the chair opposite Richard. She took everything. I have absolutely nothing left, broke, desperate, and completely out of options. The crushing reality of his situation began to suffocate him. He knew Tasha was currently standing on the sidewalk outside his foreclosed estate, furiously packing her bags and ready to leave him for good. He knew his mother and sister were sitting on the curb with their belongings in garbage bags, demanding he provide them with a luxury penthouse. He knew his reputation was hanging by a single fragile thread. If he did not show up with the $50,000 diamond necklace he had promised Tasha, his entire facade of wealth and power would crumble instantly. She would take to social media and expose him to the entire city as a broke, lying fraud. Panic completely took over his rational mind. Darius grabbed his leather briefcase and bolted out of the branch manager's office without saying another word. He sprinted through the bank lobby, ignoring the confused stares of the wealthy patrons. He burst through the glass doors and ran straight to his parked car. He threw himself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. He needed massive amounts of cash immediately, and he knew there was only one place left to get it. It was highly illegal. It was incredibly dangerous. But in his blind, arrogant desperation, Darius convinced himself he was smart enough to get away with it. He firmly believed he could fix the problem before anyone noticed the missing funds. He pulled his highly secure corporate laptop from his briefcase and flipped it open, balancing it awkwardly on the steering wheel. He connected to the bank's encrypted wireless network and quickly typed in his elite wealth management credentials. He bypassed the standard security protocols, exploiting a loophole he had discovered months ago but never dared to use. Darius accessed the corporate accounts of his firm's wealthiest, most powerful clients. These were massive institutional accounts containing millions of dollars meant for commercial real estate developments and private equity acquisitions. His hands flew across the keyboard, sweating profusely as he typed in the routing numbers for a dummy offshore account he had set up years ago for emergencies. I initiated a massive illegal wire transfer, siphoning a huge sum of money directly out of his client's corporate holdings. He held his breath, his finger hovering over the final authorization button. This was a severe federal crime. It was wire fraud, embezzlement, and a massive breach of fiduciary duty, all rolled into one desperate action. If he was caught, he would face decades in federal prison. But the overwhelming fear of losing his glamorous mistress, failing his demanding mother, and being exposed as a fraud pushed him entirely over the edge. He slammed his finger down on the enter key. The screen loaded for a terrifying, agonizing second before a green checkmark appeared. Transfer successful. Darius let out a loud, shaky breath, slumping back against the leather headrest of his car. He wiped the cold sweat from his brow, a sick, twisted smile slowly creeping onto his face. He had done it. He had the money. He could save his fake empire. He truly believed nobody was watching. He thought his corporate firm's internal auditors would not notice the missing funds until the end of the fiscal quarter, giving him plenty of time to move the money around and cover his tracks. But Darius was wrong. He was so incredibly tragically wrong. Miles away back at the sprawling brick estate that he no longer owned, I was sitting peacefully on my custom velvet sofa. I had just finished my cup of hot coffee and was enjoying the beautiful quiet solitude of my newly reclaimed home. I reached onto the glass coffee table and picked up my highly encrypted corporate tablet. The screen was completely dark, but suddenly it lit up with a bright red notification banner. The alert was not a text message from a friend or a calendar reminder. It was an automated security trigger from the internal auditing software I had personally installed on my firm's institutional investment accounts. I tapped the screen, entering my biometric password to open the full security report. I stared at the data displayed before me, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. Wire transfer initiated, the screen read in bold red letters. Account accessed by Darius Sterling, unauthorized corporate funds transferred. My husband had just willingly stepped into the ultimate inescapable trap I had set for him. He had just committed a massive federal crime using the corporate accounts that belonged entirely to my private equity firm. He thought he was stealing from faceless billionaires, but he was actually stealing directly from Vantage Holdings. He was stealing from me. And I now had the exact digital fingerprint, the absolute undeniable proof to lock him inside a federal prison cell for the rest of his miserable life. The final phase of my revenge had officially begun. I picked up my phone and dialed my head of corporate security. It was time to watch him fall. Section 5, exactly 1500 words. I picked up my phone and dialed my head of corporate security. It was time to watch him fall, while I was finalizing the audit parameters from the comfort of my sunlit living room. Darius was frantically attempting to salvage his rapidly disintegrating professional life. He had sped directly from the private bank to his opulent downtown office at Pinnacle Wealth Management. He was running entirely on adrenaline-blind panic and the false sense of security that his illegal wire transfer had temporarily bought him. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed that if he could just sever my professional ties and ruin my reputation in the commercial real estate sector, he could force me into a desperate financial corner. Darius immediately called an emergency meeting with his junior associates and client relationship managers. He stood at the head of the sleek glass conference table, aggressively smoothing his expensive tie and projecting his usual manufactured aura of black excellence. He launched into a vicious, highly calculated smear campaign against me. He confidently told his colleagues that we were going through a bitter divorce because I was mentally unstable and entirely incapable of handling the intense pressures of his elite social world. Then he made his most arrogant move yet. He instructed his team to systematically contact every single one of my high-net-worth commercial real estate clients. Darius brazenly claimed that my appraisal firm was crumbling and that my previous success was based entirely on his direct referrals and his powerful industry connections. He aggressively ordered his junior associate, a young man named Jamal, to start reassigning my biggest client contracts to a rival appraisal firm that Darius had a secret kickback arrangement with. He wanted to starve me out of the industry completely. He stood in that glass-walled conference room proudly boasting to his colleagues that I was nothing without his elite network and that I would be begging him for a settlement by the end of the fiscal quarter. I was so incredibly busy, loudly boasting about my supposed professional demise that he completely failed to notice the heavy glass doors of the wealth management firm sliding open. I stepped into the pristine reception area of Pinnacle Wealth Management, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored crimson suit that commanded absolute attention. I did not look like a broken, desperate wife. I looked like a woman who owned the entire building. The receptionist immediately sat up straight, recognizing the undeniable shift in the room's energy. I did not stop at her desk to politely sign in. I completely bypassed the crowded bullpen where Darius was actively giving his ridiculous speech. I did not even glance in his direction. I walked with absolute unwavering purpose straight down the executive corridor, heading directly for the heavy oak doors of the managing director's private office. Darius caught a glimpse of my crimson suit through the conference room glass, Just as I reached for the polished brass door handle, his eyes widened in absolute shock and immediate burning rage. He abruptly stopped his presentation mid-sentence, slamming his hands down on the table before storming out of the conference room. He was furious that I had the sheer audacity to show my face at his prestigious workplace. He fully intended to publicly humiliate me and have security forcefully drag me out into the street. "Maya, what the hell do you think you are doing?" Darius barked aggressively, marching down the corridor after me. "You have absolutely no right to be here. This is a highly secure corporate environment. You cannot just barge into my firm because you are bitter about the divorce." I completely ignored his loud, pathetic shouting. I calmly pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped right into the massive corner office of Charles Montgomery, the managing director and founder of the entire wealth management firm. Charles was a stern, highly respected man in the Atlanta financial sector, known for his absolute lack of tolerance for corporate incompetence. Darius burst into the office right behind me, his face flushed red with unhinged anger. "Charles, I am so incredibly sorry about this intrusion," Darius practically shouted, completely ignoring the professional decorum he usually worshipped. "This is my soon-to-be ex-wife Maya. She is clearly having some sort of severe mental breakdown. I will have the building security team escort her out immediately. Please forgive this ridiculous disruption." Darius confidently reached for the landline on the desk to call the security desk, but Charles slammed his hand down on top of the phone, stopping Darius in his tracks. Charles did not look annoyed by my sudden presence. He looked absolutely terrified. The older man was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. He stared at Darius with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "Are you completely out of your mind, Darius?" Charles hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. "Do not you dare call security on this woman." Darius froze, looking wildly confused. "Charles, she is just a commercial appraiser. She is just my bitter wife trying to cause a domestic scene at my workplace. She has no business being in your private office." Charles slowly stood up from his leather executive chair, looking at Darius as if he were staring at a walking corpse. "Darius, you arrogant fool," Charles said, his voice dropping to a harsh, shaking whisper. "Maya is not just a commercial appraiser. Have you spent the last 5 years completely blind to who you are married to? Her private firm, Vantage Holdings, is our primary institutional investor. She controls the absolute largest block of capital in our entire corporate portfolio. She essentially bankrolls this entire branch." The color drained from Darius's face so fast, he looked like he might actually pass out right there on the expensive Persian rug. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with a sudden crushing realization. The arrogant sneer completely melted off his face, replaced by absolute paralyzing dread. I smiled at him casually, taking a seat in one of the plush leather guest chairs opposite Charles's desk. I crossed my legs and smoothed the fabric of my crimson suit. "Hello, Darius. It is so lovely to see you hard at work. I hear you have been quite busy this morning trying to reassign my commercial appraisal clients to your corrupt little friends. It is truly a shame you spent so much time plotting my professional downfall instead of actually reviewing your own corporate compliance manuals." Darius swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet office. "Maya, what are you doing here?" I turned my attention back to the sweating managing director. Charles let us get straight to the point of my visit. As the primary institutional investor for Pinnacle Wealth Management, I am exercising my contractual right to initiate an immediate full forensic audit of this branch. And I am explicitly directing my auditing team to begin their investigation with the specific client portfolios currently managed by your senior wealth advisor, Darius Sterling. Charles vigorously nodded his head, looking like a man desperately trying to save his own life from a sinking ship. "Absolutely, Miss Sterling. We will provide your auditors with full unrestricted access to all of his files, transaction logs, and client communications immediately. We value our relationship with Vantage Holdings above absolutely everything else. We will cooperate fully with your investigation." Darius stumbled backward, his back hitting the heavy oak door. He looked like the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. A forensic audit. The words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. The sheer terrifying magnitude of what I had just initiated crashed down upon him. He knew exactly what a forensic audit meant. It meant a team of ruthless financial experts would be tearing through every single digital record, every ledger, and every authorized transfer he had ever made during his entire tenure at the firm. It meant they were going to find the massive illegal wire transfer he had executed just an hour ago in his car. The crushing weight of his federal crime hit him all at once. He had illegally accessed his firm's corporate client accounts to siphon money into his hidden offshore trust. He had committed textbook wire fraud and embezzlement. He had thought he was a brilliant mastermind, but he was actually just a desperate, reckless amateur who had left a massive digital trail of evidence leading right back to his own login credentials. And now the woman he had tried to throw out on the street was the very person commanding the audit that would uncover his crime. Maya Darius choked out, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "You cannot do this. You have to stop this audit. You are going to ruin my entire career." "Your career is the absolute least of your problems right now, Darius," I replied, my voice cold and smooth like polished glass. "You should be much more worried about your freedom. I suggest you go back to your desk and start gathering your personal belongings. The auditors will be seizing your corporate laptop and freezing your professional credentials in exactly 5 minutes." Darius stared at me, his chest heaving with frantic, shallow breaths. The room started spinning around him. He realized with absolute terrifying clarity that I was actively hunting for the illegal wire transfer. He knew I had the power, the resources, and the irrefutable evidence to have him locked inside a federal prison for decades. He was completely cornered. His bank accounts were frozen. His mother and sister were homeless. His mistress was threatening to leave him, and his fake empire of black excellence was about to be burned completely to the ground. Panic, raw and blinding, completely took over his rational mind. He knew he could not stop the forensic audit. He knew he could not hide the missing funds. He decided in that desperate, unhinged moment that his only possible way out was to totally destroy my credibility before the audit could be officially completed. He firmly believed that his carefully cultivated social capital, his influential fraternity connections, and his powerful standing in the elite black community could somehow override my financial power. He believed if he could publicly frame me as a bitter, mentally unstable, and jealous ex-wife, he could invalidate the audit results and secure emergency backing from his wealthy network. I knew the annual Alumni Black Excellence Gala was happening this weekend. It was the absolute most important social event of the year for the Atlanta elite. He decided right then and there that he was going to use that highly public stage to launch a massive, devastating attack against me. He was going to risk absolutely everything on one final desperate public performance to save his miserable life. "You think you have won," Maya Darius hissed, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and pure hatred. "You think your money makes you untouchable. But you are nothing in this city without my name. You have no real influence. I am going to expose you to everyone we know. I am going to show the entire world exactly how crazy and vindictive you really are." I smiled, stood up gracefully, and walked slowly toward him. I stopped just inches from his sweating face, breathing in the sharp scent of his absolute terror. "I am counting on it, Darius," I whispered softly. "I highly suggest you wear your absolute best suit to the gala. You are going to want to look your absolute best when your entire world finally burns." I turned my back on Darius and walked out of the managing director's office, leaving him to face the devastating reality of the forensic audit. I did not look back. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I stepped into the private elevator. It was an alert from my network of informants. While Darius was actively panicking in his corporate glass cage, his mother was desperately attempting to orchestrate her own pathetic counterattack across town. Vivian had spent the previous night sleeping on a cheap air mattress in a budget motel, entirely stripped of the opulent mansion she had stolen from me. Her fragile ego was completely shattered, but her toxic pride demanded immediate retaliation. She knew she could not defeat me financially, so she fell back on the only weapon she had left. She weaponized her powerful social standing within the elite African American community. Vivian was the highly esteemed president of the Heritage Fellowship Church Committee, It was a position she held with an iron grip, using her religious authority to ruthlessly manipulate the city's upper class. She hastily convened an emergency committee luncheon at the prestigious Oak Ridge Country Club. She invited the most influential deacons, wealthy pastors, and elite society women in Atlanta. Her strategy was brilliantly wicked. She planned to completely destroy my reputation before the news of her humiliating eviction could spread through the city. She wanted to brand me as an unstable, aggressive villain who was maliciously destroying her perfect son. I pulled my car into the country club parking lot just as the luncheon was getting underway. I straightened my crimson suit and walked directly toward the grand ballroom. Through the heavy oak doors, I could hear Vivian's voice echoing over the microphone. She was putting on an absolute masterclass in theatrical manipulation. She stood at the polished wooden podium, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I ask you all to join hands and pray for my son Darius." Vivian wept into the microphone. "He is currently enduring a terrible spiritual battle. His wife Maya has completely lost her mind. She is a wicked, gold-digging woman who has aggressively forced me and my innocent daughter out of our beloved family home. I tried to welcome her into our prestigious family, but she is filled with nothing but bitter jealousy. We must pray for her barren womb and her hardened heart. She is desperately trying to destroy a good God-fearing black man because she is entirely incapable of providing him with a child to secure his legacy." I stood in the doorway listening to her venomous lies. This was the exact same ruthless tactic she had used against my own mother 20 years ago. When I was just a child, my mother had worked as a humble caterer for this very church. Vivian had falsely accused my working-class mother of stealing from the collection plate simply because my mother had politely demanded to be paid for her hard work. Vivian had used her elite social standing to completely ruin my mother's small business, ultimately running her right out of the neighborhood. Vivian had built her entire pristine reputation by aggressively stepping on the necks of hardworking women. She thought she could do the exact same thing to me. She was tragically mistaken. I pushed the ballroom doors wide open, instantly drawing the attention of the entire room. 75 wealthy committee members, deacons, and pastors turned around in their velvet chairs to look at me. I did not yell. I did not look angry. I wore a polite, completely serene smile as I walked straight down the center aisle. I carried a heavy stack of professionally bound black leather folders in my arms. Vivian gasped loudly, dropping her lace handkerchief onto the podium. The fake tears instantly vanished from her eyes, immediately replaced by absolute, unadulterated panic. "Maya, what are you doing here?" she shrieked into the microphone. "You are not a member of this country club. Security. Someone call the security desk and have this aggressive woman removed immediately." I ignored her frantic screaming completely. I walked directly to the head table where the senior pastor and the head deacons were sitting. I began calmly passing out the heavy leather folders, placing one perfectly in front of each church elder. "Please excuse my sudden interruption, gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent, shocked ballroom. "But as the lead commercial appraiser handling the municipal zoning for your new community center, I felt it was absolutely necessary to personally deliver the latest financial appraisals to the committee. I know how deeply Vivian cares about the church's building fund, so I wanted to ensure complete, total transparency." Vivian scrambled down from the podium, her high heels catching on the carpet. She lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the black folders away from the senior pastor. "Do not look at those," she screamed wildly. "She is a liar. She is a bitter, barren woman trying to poison this holy sanctuary. Throw those documents in the trash right now." But the senior pastor had already opened the thick leather folder. He adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the first page. The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. The other deacons opened their folders, and I watched their expressions rapidly shift from mild confusion to absolute burning outrage. These were not commercial real estate appraisals. They were certified, undeniable bank statements. "What exactly is this?" Vivian, the senior pastor, asked, his voice shaking with profound anger. He held up a highlighted page. "This is a certified ledger from the church's primary building fund. It clearly shows a massive transfer of $30,000 authorized by your signature last October. I stepped forward smoothly, answering the question for her. That specific transfer was used to pay for a luxury all-inclusive vacation to the Maldives for Vivian and her daughter Kiara. If you turn to page 4, you will see another unauthorized withdrawal of $15,000. That money was illegally funneled directly into a private tailoring account to purchase 6 custom Italian suits for her son Darius. Vivian began to hyperventilate. She backed away from the head table, shaking her head frantically. No, that is a complete lie. The bank made a mistake. Maya forged these documents to frame me. She is a demon sent to destroy this church. I turned to face the entire ballroom. For the past 5 years, your esteemed committee president has been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from the Community Center Building Fund. She has been funding her entire fake luxury lifestyle using the hard-earned tithes and generous donations of this congregation. She stands up here and publicly prays for my soul while secretly stealing money meant for underprivileged children in our community. Every single transaction has been meticulously tracked, verified, and officially certified by my auditing firm. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Women who had just been nodding along in sympathy with Vivian were now shouting in utter disgust. The deacons stood up from the table, their faces flushed with righteous fury. Vivian, you are officially stripped of your title as committee president effective immediately, the senior pastor declared, his voice booming over the rising commotion. You are banned from this country club and from our sanctuary. I am calling the local authorities and handing these financial ledgers directly over to the police fraud division. May God have mercy on your soul, because this church absolutely will not. Vivian let out a loud, agonizing wail. The pristine, untouchable social facade she had spent decades ruthlessly protecting was completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. The elite women she had desperately tried to impress were looking at her with pure, unfiltered revulsion. She grabbed her purse and ran out of the ballroom, sobbing hysterically as she fled the overwhelming humiliation. I stood calmly by the head table watching her run. I had finally avenged the cruel injustice she inflicted on my mother 20 years ago. Vivian sprinted to her car in the parking lot, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock the door. She collapsed into the driver's seat, completely hyperventilating. She pulled out her phone and frantically dialed her son. Darius answered on the first ring. Darius, she sobbed into the receiver, completely inconsolable. Maya found the bank statements. She brought the church ledgers to the country club. The pastor saw everything. They stripped me of my title. They are calling the police. She ruined me, Darius. She completely destroyed my life. I have absolutely nothing left. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Darius spoke. His voice was cold, completely detached from reality, and laced with absolute unhinged desperation. Do not worry, Mom. Darius replied, his tone chillingly calm. I am going to completely destroy Maya at the gala tonight. I have the ultimate weapon against her, and I will make certain she suffers. You need to pull yourself together right now. Go to Kiara's apartment, lock the doors, and do not speak to the police without a lawyer present. I have been preparing for this exact moment. Maya thinks she is 5 steps ahead of us, but she is completely blind to my real power in this city. When I take the stage tonight, my fraternity brothers and elite corporate sponsors will totally back me up. I will paint her as an unhinged, dangerous woman. Her reputation will be completely dead by midnight, I absolutely promise. I stood calmly in this parking lot of the Oak Ridge Country Club, letting the cool Atlanta air wash over me. The chaotic, deeply satisfying sounds of the church committee completely dismantling Vivian's fake holy empire still echoed faintly through the grand oak doors. The senior pastor's booming voice ordering Vivian to be permanently banned from the sanctuary was a beautiful, fitting conclusion to a 20-year-old injustice. I took a deep, steadying breath, completely unbothered by the dramatic scene I had just orchestrated. Vivian had weaponized her religion and her elite social standing to ruthlessly destroy my hardworking mother. Now the very same institution had aggressively stripped Vivian of her power, leaving her humiliated, disgraced, and facing a massive criminal fraud investigation. I slowly walked back to my sleek black Maybach, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound, undeniable justice. The first major pillar of my revenge was complete. The second, and perhaps the most pathetic, was currently unfolding in a rented penthouse across town. While Darius was actively drowning in the terrifying reality of his incoming federal audit, and his mother was sobbing hysterically in a budget motel parking lot, Tasha decided to make a monumentally stupid move. She was incredibly young, wildly arrogant, and entirely desperate to maintain her carefully curated, totally fake online persona. When Tasha realized her supposedly wealthy provider was actually a bankrupt fraud, she did not quietly pack her bags and disappear. Instead, she decided to aggressively capitalize on the unfolding drama. Tasha firmly believed that any publicity was good publicity, and she desperately needed to control the narrative before her millions of social media followers discovered the humiliating truth about her relationship. She thought she could spin this disaster into a highly profitable viral moment of sheer victimhood. Tasha set up her expensive ring light in the middle of the luxury penthouse she had originally thought Darius was going to pay for. She aggressively fluffed her hair, checked her heavy makeup in the monitor, and hit the button to go live on her primary social media platform. Within minutes, over 50,000 eager followers tuned in, ready to consume the juicy dramatic gossip she always provided. Tasha sat on the pristine white sofa, clutching a fake designer handbag to her chest, and immediately began weaving a completely fabricated, highly venomous story. She stared directly into the camera lens, putting on a masterful performance of fake tears and aggressive indignation. "You guys, I have to tell you the absolute truth about what is happening to me." And Darius, Tasha whined into the camera, her voice dripping with artificial sadness. "We are experiencing a terrible, unprovoked attack on our beautiful black love story. Darius is a highly successful, brilliant wealth advisor. He is a king. But his bitter, jealous, significantly older wife, Maya, has completely lost her mind. She cannot handle the fact that a powerful man like Darius finally found a young, vibrant woman who truly respects him. Maya is aggressively trying to ruin his entire career because she is a miserable, barren woman who hates seeing us happy. She is literally engaging in severe financial abuse, trying to illegally freeze his hard-earned money just to punish us for falling in deep, genuine love." I sat comfortably in the plush leather seat of my Maybach, watching Tasha's ridiculous, unhinged live stream on my encrypted tablet. My driver navigated the smooth Atlanta traffic as I listened to this 24-year-old influencer actively try to destroy my professional reputation to her massive, gullible audience. She confidently paraded around the rented penthouse, dramatically pointing to the expansive skyline views and the rented luxury furniture, falsely claiming it was all evidence of Darius's immense, untouchable wealth. She aggressively painted me as a sad, pathetic working-class woman who was desperately trying to cling to a man who had clearly upgraded. "She is trying to steal his money, you guys," Tasha continued, her voice rising in theatrical pitch. "But we are not going to let this jealous, toxic woman destroy our incredible future." Darius is securing a massive multi-million-dollar investment deal tonight at the HBCU Alumni Gala. Hai is going to publicly expose all of her ridiculous lies. We are going to rise above her pathetic, desperate jealousy. True black excellence will always prevail over bitter, miserable haters. I smiled, tapping a few commands into my secure corporate tablet. Tasha truly believed her massive online platform made her completely untouchable. She believed she could aggressively slander my name, frame me for financial abuse, and ride the resulting wave of viral sympathy to secure even more lucrative brand deals. She was incredibly naive to the brutal, unforgiving reality of corporate power. While Tasha was midstream passionately detailing how she and Darius were victims of my supposed jealousy, a loud, sharp knock echoed from the heavy wooden door of the rented penthouse. Tasha paused, looking slightly annoyed by the sudden interruption to her theatrical performance. "Hold on, you guys," Tasha said to her massive audience, adjusting her dress before walking toward the door. "It is probably just room service or the concierge bringing up the expensive champagne Darius promised me. Let me go show you all how well my king treats me, even when his crazy ex-wife is trying to ruin our lives." Tasha confidently swung the heavy door wide open, holding her phone up to capture the moment for her eagerly watching followers. But it was not a polite concierge holding a silver tray of expensive champagne. It was a tall, stern-looking man in a plain gray suit, holding a thick stack of legal documents. He looked directly into the camera lens, totally unfazed by the fact that he was currently being broadcast to tens of thousands of people. "Are you Tasha Williams?" the man asked, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. Tasha frowned immediately, lowering the phone slightly, though the camera was still capturing the man's imposing figure. "Yes, I am Tasha. Who are you? What are you doing at my private penthouse?" The man swiftly thrust the heavy stack of official legal papers directly into Tasha's hands. He did not hesitate or offer any polite explanation. "You have just been officially served," he stated clearly and loudly. Tasha gasped, fumbling with the thick documents. Served? Served for what? The man turned around and began walking down the plush carpeted hallway. "You have been officially served with a massive multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit filed directly by the legal team representing Maya Sterling and Vantage Holdings. You are being aggressively sued for libel, slander, and tortious interference with a corporate entity. I highly suggest you retain competent legal counsel immediately. Have a very pleasant day, Miss Williams." The heavy door closed with a soft click, leaving Tasha standing in the grand entryway of the rented penthouse, staring down at the thick legal summons in absolute, unadulterated horror. The live comments on her social media stream began moving so fast they were completely unreadable. Thousands of her followers were aggressively reacting to the shocking, completely unexpected turn of events. Tasha's confident, smug facade instantly crumbled. She began to panic, flipping frantically through the complex legal jargon, desperately trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the devastating lawsuit she had just been handed. But I was not finished. The defamation lawsuit was merely the opening act of her complete professional destruction. I tapped another command on my tablet, authorizing the immediate release of a swift, highly targeted corporate public relations statement. Tasha's entire influencer career, her glamorous lifestyle, and her fake designer wardrobe were all entirely funded by a handful of lucrative corporate brand sponsorships. Her absolute biggest sponsor, the one that paid for her luxury car and her expensive apartment, was an elite high-end cosmetics line known for its fierce commitment to female empowerment. What Tasha did not know, what she had completely failed to research when she confidently signed her lucrative influencer contract, was that this specific luxury cosmetics line had recently been aggressively acquired by a massive parent company. And that parent company was a direct, wholly owned subsidiary of Vantage Holdings. I literally owned the company that paid her massive salary. Less than 3 minutes after Tasha was handed the defamation lawsuit on live camera, her personal smartphone buzzed loudly with an urgent, high-priority email notification. Still holding her live streaming phone in one hand, Tasha frantically opened the email on her secondary device. I watched her face contort in absolute, unfiltered terror as she read the subject line. Notice of immediate contract termination. The email was brutal, brief, and entirely legally binding. It explicitly stated that her lucrative brand partnership was being immediately, permanently terminated due to a severe violation of the company's strict morality and public conduct clauses. It cited her recent public, highly defamatory statements against the parent company's executive leadership. It formally demanded the immediate return of all sponsored merchandise and explicitly warned her that any further public comments regarding the brand would result in additional devastating legal action. "No," Tasha gasped, her voice cracking into a shrill, panicked squeak. "No, this cannot be happening. They cannot just cancel my entire contract like this. This is my biggest deal." The comments on her live stream exploded with brutal mockery and harsh judgment. Her followers, who just minutes ago were cheering her on, were now aggressively tearing her apart. They called her a fraud, a homewrecker, and a foolish, arrogant girl who had messed with the wrong, powerful woman. Tasha realized her entire curated fake empire was burning down in front of a massive, hostile audience. Tasha's live stream ended in a spectacular, hysterical meltdown. She screamed frantically at her phone, aggressively slapping the end broadcast button and plunging her thousands of viewers into abrupt darkness. I smiled, turning off my tablet. Tasha's public destruction was complete. Desperate, broke, and facing a massive defamation lawsuit, Tasha immediately dialed Darius. Her voice was shrill and completely unhinged as she screamed through the phone. She aggressively blamed him for her entire professional ruin, shouting that his broke, fraudulent lifestyle had completely destroyed her lucrative career. She explicitly told him that she was entirely done with him, that she was leaving him immediately, and that she would gladly testify against him in federal court if it meant saving her own skin. Darius sat alone in his dark, quiet office, listening to the dial tone after Tasha aggressively hung up on him. He was now utterly, completely isolated. He had no money, no powerful mistress, and no family to support him. The stage was perfectly set for his desperate, unhinged move at the gala. The silence in Darius's office was deafening. He slammed his fist onto his pristine glass desk, shattering a framed photograph of his college fraternity brothers. He could not accept defeat. He absolutely refused to let a woman from Southside Atlanta strip him of his carefully cultivated elite identity. Tonight was the annual HBCU Alumni Black Excellence Gala, the absolute pinnacle of high society networking in the city. Every major corporate sponsor, wealthy investor, and influential deacon would be sitting in that grand ballroom. Darius firmly believed that if he could just get in front of that powerful crowd, he could completely spin the narrative. He planned to step up to the podium and confidently announce a totally fabricated multi-million-dollar corporate merger. He intended to aggressively frame me as a mentally unstable, disgruntled, soon-to-be ex-wife who was actively trying to sabotage his historic success out of pure, barren jealousy. I desperately needed the emergency financial backing of his wealthy alumni network to cover his massive illegal wire transfer before the federal auditors found it. But to sell the perfect illusion of an untouchable, high-powered king, he absolutely needed his glamorous queen standing quietly by his side. Darius stormed out of his office and drove his leased luxury sedan straight to the budget motel where he assumed Tasha had fled. He knew Tasha had no money of her own to secure a flight out of the city. He tracked Tasha down as she was desperately trying to pawn the cheap designer gifts he had bought her. He physically blocked her from getting into a rideshare vehicle. He aggressively grabbed her arm, completely dropping his polished, gentlemanly facade. He ordered Tasha to put on her most expensive evening gown and stand by his side at the gala, violently threatening to expose her own shady tax filings if she dared to publicly abandon him tonight. Tasha, terrified of his sudden, unhinged aggression and equally afraid of facing her own legal consequences, reluctantly agreed to play the part of the devoted silent partner for one final evening. Darius forced her into the passenger seat, his eyes wild and completely devoid of sanity. He was actively marching toward his own execution, firmly believing he was about to conquer the entire world. Meanwhile, on the top floor of an ultra-exclusive high-rise in Buckhead, I was experiencing an entirely different kind of evening. I stood gracefully in front of a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in my private dressing room. My personal stylist was meticulously adjusting the delicate train of my stunning custom-made emerald green gown. The heavy silk draped perfectly over my frame, radiating absolute, undeniable power. I wore no flashy, oversized jewelry. I did not need fake diamonds to loudly announce my worth to a room full of strangers. True power is quiet, calculating, and completely self-assured. I checked the encrypted tablet resting on my vanity table. The digital traps I had set earlier that afternoon were holding perfectly. The forensic audit of Darius's entire wealth management portfolio was moving forward with terrifying, unstoppable speed. Every single one of his desperate illegal financial maneuvers was currently being documented, time-stamped, and formally certified by my elite team of corporate investigators. As my stylist finished pinning my hair into a sleek, elegant updo, the secure intercom on my wall chimed softly. My private head of security announced that I had an incredibly urgent, highly unexpected visitor waiting in the private lobby downstairs. It was Julian Pierce, the notoriously ruthless, deeply arrogant senior law partner who had confidently tried to bully me into signing away my marital assets just a few days ago, was now standing in my building, begging my security team for a brief audience. "Send him up," I said, my voice smooth and totally unbothered. "Let us see exactly what the great Julian Pierce wants from me tonight." The heavy steel doors of my private elevator slid open a few minutes later. Julian stepped into my luxurious penthouse looking absolutely nothing like the terrifying legal shark who dominated Atlanta courtrooms. His expensive designer suit was completely wrinkled. His silk tie was pulled loose around his neck, and his face was slick with a heavy, nervous sweat. He clutched a small leather briefcase to his chest, as if his entire life depended on it. He took one look at my emerald gown, my calm expression, and the sheer intimidating scale of my penthouse, and he physically swallowed hard. The power dynamic between us had fundamentally permanently shifted, and he was acutely aware that his survival rested entirely in my hands. "Miss Sterling," Julian stammered, his loud, booming voice reduced to a desperate, shaking whisper. "I sincerely apologize for arriving completely unannounced. I know you are preparing to attend the gala tonight, but I needed to bring you something immediately. I needed to prove my absolute loyalty to Vantage Holdings before the situation goes any further." I turned away from the mirror and walked slowly toward him, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. I crossed my arms and looked at him with profound, chilling indifference. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why you are sweating in my living room, Julian. I have a very important schedule to keep tonight, and I do not tolerate professional incompetence." Julian aggressively wiped his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. He popped open the golden clasps of his leather briefcase and reached inside. He pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive and held it out to me as if it were a highly explosive device. "I know exactly what Darius is planning to do tonight," Julian said, his eyes darting around my penthouse nervously. "He called my private cell phone an hour ago begging me for emergency legal representation. He stupidly confessed his entire strategy to me. He is going to use a series of entirely forged commercial real estate appraisals to secure emergency funding from his elite alumni network at the gala. He plans to use your pristine professional reputation to validate his fake properties. He wants to announce a massive fabricated merger to secure desperate backing from the city elite." I stared at the silver flash drive in his trembling hand, a slow, deeply satisfied smile creeping onto my face. I already knew Darius was forging my appraisal signature. I had known for over a year. But having his own highly esteemed defense attorney actively sell him out was a beautiful, unexpected bonus. "Why are you giving this to me, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You are a senior partner. You legally owe your client's attorney-client privilege. You are risking your entire career by handing over his internal communications to the woman actively destroying his life." Julian dropped to his knees right there on my expensive living room rug. The sight of the most feared lawyer in Atlanta kneeling before me was absolutely intoxicating. He held the flash drive up to me, his face twisted in pure, unfiltered terror. "Because Darius is a dead man walking." Julian practically sobbed, completely abandoning his fierce reputation. He confessed to me that he initiated an illegal corporate wire transfer today to cover his debts. He committed federal wire fraud. When the authorities raid his office, they are going to look at everyone connected to him. "Miss Sterling, I am handing over every single internal email, every forged document, and every recorded confession Darius ever gave my firm. Please, I am begging you, do not destroy my law firm. Do not pull your $2 million annual retainer. Do not lump me in with his pathetic sinking ship. I am entirely yours. I will do absolutely anything you ask." I looked down at the broken, sweating man kneeling at my feet. I reached out and delicately plucked the silver flash drive from his trembling fingers. I had just turned my husband's most powerful, ruthless legal defender into my own personal terrified pawn. "You made a very wise decision tonight, Julian," I said, my voice cold and commanding. "You will keep your retainer, you will keep your precious law firm, but you belong to Vantage Holdings now. If I ever need a corporate shark to completely eviscerate a rival, you will answer the phone on the first ring. Do we have a clear understanding?" "Yes, Miss Sterling," Julian gasped, nodding his head frantically. "Thank you. I am completely at your disposal. You may leave now," I ordered, turning my back on him. "I have an empire to finish dismantling." Julian scrambled to his feet, bowing his head repeatedly before rushing back into the private elevator. The heavy steel doors slid shut, leaving me alone in the quiet luxury of my penthouse. I walked over to my polished dining table and carefully slipped the silver flash drive into my elegant designer clutch. Darius was walking into that prestigious ballroom tonight, firmly believing he was going to save his reputation by stepping on my neck. He truly believed his wealthy fraternity brothers would protect him from a working-class woman. He had absolutely no idea that I was walking into that exact same room armed with enough irrefutable federal evidence to lock him away for the rest of his natural life. I checked my flawless reflection one last time. My custom emerald gown perfectly caught the warm, ambient lighting of the room. I looked like absolute royalty. I looked like a woman who was totally in control of her own destiny. I picked up my clutch, smoothed my skirt, and took the elevator down to the secure underground parking garage. My sleek black Maybach was already idling quietly near the exit, the polished exterior gleaming brightly under the fluorescent lights. My private driver immediately stepped out and respectfully opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the plush, luxurious leather seat, feeling the powerful engine hum quietly beneath me. The cabin was perfectly climate-controlled, a quiet, peaceful sanctuary before the coming storm. I pulled my highly encrypted corporate smartphone from my clutch. I opened a direct, highly secure messaging channel that I had established months ago for this exact specific purpose. I did not text my lawyers. I did not text my private security team. I typed a single, perfectly clear text message directly to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Atlanta. The target is moving. Be at the gala by 10:00 p.m. I hit send, ensuring the message was delivered and read. I placed the phone back into my clutch and looked out the tinted window as my driver pulled the Maybach out onto the brightly lit city streets. The final spectacular act of my glorious revenge was set in motion. The trap was perfectly laid, the audience was eagerly gathering, and my unhinged, arrogant husband was walking completely blind right into the center of the blazing inferno. Drive, I told my chauffeur, my voice steady and laced with absolute chilling anticipation. Let us go show the city what real power looks like. The Maybach glided seamlessly through the bustling downtown traffic, the dark-tinted windows shielding me from the chaotic world outside. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest and closed my eyes for a brief, incredibly peaceful moment. Every single calculated move I had made over the last 24 hours was flawlessly executed. The aggressive eviction, the frozen bank accounts, the highly publicized church committee disgrace, and the spectacular social media downfall of his young mistress. All of it was merely the opening act. The true masterpiece was waiting for me inside that opulent ballroom. I knew Darius was currently sweating under the bright chandelier lights, desperately trying to project his fake black excellence to a room full of powerful people who were about to watch him lose his freedom forever. I felt my pulse steady, completely devoid of fear or hesitation. My phone rested silently inside my clutch, the digital confirmation of his impending federal arrest, secured safely alongside his lawyer's devastating flash drive. I opened my eyes as the grand entrance of the gala venue finally came into clear view. The stage was perfectly set. The performance was ready. It was time to finish this once and for all. Inside the grand ballroom of the magnificent Atlanta Luxury Hotel, the annual HBCU Alumni Black Excellence Gala was already in full swing. The expansive room was an absolute masterpiece of opulent event design, meticulously draped in rich velvet fabrics and illuminated by thousands of sparkling crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive designer perfumes, aged bourbon, and the heavy, intoxicating atmosphere of sheer elite networking. The absolute wealthiest, most influential African-American professionals in the city were gathered here tonight, holding their delicate champagne flutes and actively exchanging highly lucrative corporate connections. Right in the very center of this glamorous high society ecosystem stood my soon-to-be ex-husband. Darius was actively working the massive room with the desperate, frantic energy of a drowning man trying to sell a sinking ship. He wore a brand new, custom-tailored velvet tuxedo jacket that he absolutely could not afford, projecting a flawless manufactured illusion of massive corporate success. He confidently shook hands with powerful investors, flashing his brilliant practice smile while aggressively selling his absolute lies. He loudly boasted to everyone who would listen about a completely fabricated multi-million-dollar upcoming merger, desperately hoping to secure emergency undocumented financial backing before his federal crimes were permanently exposed on Monday morning. Standing right by his side was Tasha, looking incredibly uncomfortable and entirely out of place. She was squeezed into a tight, incredibly loud designer gown that Darius had aggressively forced her to wear. She clung to his arm, her usual smug influencer confidence entirely replaced by a look of sheer, undeniable terror. She knew he was completely broke. She knew he was a massive fraud. But the terrifying threat of him exposing her own severe financial and legal liabilities kept her firmly glued to his side, playing the miserable part of the devoted, supportive partner. Hovering nervously near the VIP tables were Vivian and Kiara. They had arrived at the prestigious event in a cheap ride-share vehicle, desperately trying to maintain their own shattered social facades. Vivian wore a heavy, outdated sequined gown, her face plastered with a rigid, completely fake smile. She aggressively attempted to ignore the loud, persistent whispers coming from the tables occupied by the Heritage Fellowship Church committee members. The elite church ladies were already actively gossiping about her humiliating, spectacular public excommunication that had occurred just a few hours ago at the country club. They pointed and stared, their eyes filled with absolute, unfiltered judgment. Kiara stood silently next to her mother, completely devoid of her usual arrogant, entitled attitude, deeply mourning the painful loss of her repossessed sports car and her frozen, empty bank accounts. They were all actively participating in a pathetic, desperate pantomime, pretending their fake, crumbling empire was still standing strong. The soft, ambient music suddenly faded out, and the Grand Master of Ceremonies stepped up to the polished wooden podium. He tapped the microphone, officially calling the massive, wealthy audience to order. He launched into a lengthy, highly complimentary introduction, formally presenting Darius as a visionary leader in the Atlanta financial sector and a shining, flawless example of modern Black excellence. Darius confidently stepped up onto the brilliantly lit stage, soaking in the thunderous, admiring applause of his wealthy peers. He adjusted his expensive silk bow tie and looked out over the massive sea of influential faces. He truly, deeply believed he had successfully survived the chaotic destruction of his personal life. He believed he was completely untouchable right here in this very room. "Thank you, my beautiful brothers and sisters," Darius began, his deep voice booming confidently through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate our immense collective power. We are here to talk about the vital, absolute importance of actively building real, sustainable generational wealth in the Black community. We must aggressively secure our prestigious legacies for the future." He paused dramatically, placing both his hands firmly on the edges of the podium, leaning forward to deliver what he thought was a powerful, inspiring message. But building true, lasting wealth requires incredibly difficult, necessary choices. Darius continued, his tone shifting into something remarkably dark, cruel, and highly calculated. "It requires us to fiercely protect our valuable assets and our prestigious brands. Sometimes, to reach the absolute pinnacle of success, we must find the immense courage to permanently cut loose the toxic dead weight that aggressively holds back our kings. We must actively separate ourselves from bitter, stagnant individuals who lack the elevated vision to match our royal ambition. We must ruthlessly shed the barren, unsupportive partnerships that threaten to drag our beautiful legacies down into the dirt." A low, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the massive crowd. The thinly veiled, incredibly vicious attack on me was completely obvious to anyone who knew even a fraction of our personal history. He was actively, publicly trying to frame me as a miserable, inadequate working-class failure who had desperately tried to hold back his phenomenal, historic success. He was setting the stage to completely dismiss my upcoming financial actions as the unhinged, crazy behavior of a deeply jealous, totally abandoned woman. He stood there on that grand stage, aggressively basking in his own manufactured glory, ready to deliver the final, devastating lines of his pathetic, fabricated speech. He never got the chance to finish his sentence. The heavy, towering mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom suddenly swung wide open with a massive echoing crash that instantly silenced the entire room. The heavy sound reverberated sharply against the crystal chandeliers, completely cutting off Darius's arrogant, booming voice. Every single head in the massive audience whipped around to look at the entrance. I stepped gracefully into the brilliant light of the ballroom. I was wearing my custom-made, breathtaking emerald green gown, radiating absolute, undeniable, chilling power. I was not alone. I was aggressively flanked by my personal, highly trained private security detail, their imposing figures forming a protective, solid wall around me. Walking in perfect synchronized step right behind me was my elite, sharp-suited team of federal financial auditors, each carrying thick, heavy leather briefcases filled with absolute destruction. The entire ballroom went completely deathly silent. You could have clearly heard a single pin drop on the thick carpet. The sheer, overwhelming energy I brought into that space was completely intoxicating and entirely terrifying. I did not look like a bitter, discarded, or broken woman. I looked like an absolute conquering queen arriving to brutally execute a treasonous peasant. I walked with slow, deliberate, powerful strides straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, heading directly toward the front VIP tables. The wealthy crowd literally parted before me, stepping back in absolute awe and immediate chilling fear. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage, watching the color completely and totally drain out of Darius's sweating face. His arrogant, confident posture instantly collapsed. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white, his mouth opening and closing in absolute unfiltered horror. Tasha, sitting at the front table, let out a loud, pathetic gasp, physically shrinking down into her chair as if she were desperately trying to become invisible. Vivian and Kiara completely froze, looking at my imposing security team with wide, terrified eyes, realizing their absolute worst nightmare had just confidently walked right into the room. Security. Darius stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate squeak. His carefully cultivated baritone completely vanished, replaced by sheer, undeniable panic. Security, please remove this woman from the ballroom immediately. She is not an invited guest. She is actively trespassing at a private, highly secure corporate event. Someone get her out of here right now. The event security guards stationed around the perimeter of the room took one single look at my massive, highly trained private detail and immediately decided not to move a single solitary muscle. They recognized true superior power when they saw it. I reached the front of the room and stopped directly in front of the VIP table. I did not yell. I did not scream. I calmly looked up at Darius, who was visibly shaking on the stage, sweating profusely under the bright spotlight. I turned my head slightly and made a single, very subtle hand signal to the lead sound and visual engineer sitting in the control booth at the back of the room. I had quietly purchased the audio-visual company that serviced this venue exactly 3 hours ago. They now worked entirely exclusively for Vantage Holdings. The massive high-definition digital screens positioned directly behind Darius on the stage were meant to proudly display his fake corporate logo and his fraudulent, fabricated wealth management credentials. Instead, the bright screens suddenly flickered violently, cutting out for a brief second before flashing back to life with a completely different, absolutely devastating image. Displayed in massive glowing letters for every single elite investor, wealthy pastor, and influential community leader to see were the highly confidential, incredibly damning internal emails that Julian Pierce had desperately handed over to me on the silver flash drive. The first massive email displayed on the glowing screen was dated from earlier that exact same afternoon. It was a direct, panicked message from Darius to Julian, explicitly begging his lawyer for help covering up his massive corporate theft. The text was undeniably clear and completely legally binding. Julian, I need you to stall the divorce proceedings immediately. I just accessed the corporate client accounts and illegally wired $400,000 into my offshore trust to stop Tasha from leaving me and to pay off my massive gambling debts. Maya froze my local accounts. I committed federal wire fraud today. If the internal auditors find this missing money on Monday, I am going to federal prison. You have to help me forge these commercial appraisals tonight to secure replacement funding. The entire ballroom erupted into a massive collective gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. The wealthy investors. Darius had just been actively soliciting for money, stared at the glowing screens in absolute profound horror. The prominent church deacons shook their heads in utter disgust. The elite high society crowd immediately realized they were currently looking at a desperate criminal fraud. Darius turned around slowly, looking up at the massive screen behind him. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing terror as he read his own desperate, highly illegal confession, illuminated in bright, unforgiving light. The silver flash drive had completely destroyed his final pathetic defense. The trap had officially permanently snapped totally shut. The entire grand ballroom erupted into absolute unfiltered chaos. The pristine, elegant atmosphere of the HBCU Alumni Gala completely dissolved in a matter of seconds. The wealthy investors who had just been eagerly shaking Darius's hand were now staring at the glowing screens in profound, unadulterated horror. Influential community leaders pointed at the stage, their faces contorted with absolute disgust. The prominent church deacons, already reeling from Vivian's humiliating excommunication earlier that afternoon, looked at Darius with pure, unvarnished revulsion. The carefully constructed, flawless facade of black excellence that Darius had spent years ruthlessly cultivating had just been violently shattered in front of the most powerful people in the entire city of Atlanta. He had been publicly exposed as a desperate, pathetic corporate criminal. Darius gripped the edges of the wooden podium, his knuckles turning completely white as sheer blinding panic totally consumed his rational mind. He looked wildly around the massive ballroom, his eyes darting frantically as the overwhelming noise of the shocked crowd pounded against his ears. He realized his entire fake empire was actively burning to the ground, and I was standing right in the center of the blazing inferno holding the match. He desperately needed to regain control of the narrative before the elite investors formally walked out of the room. He decided to double down on his toxic, deeply ingrained sexism, firmly believing he could aggressively gaslight the entire audience into doubting my undeniable evidence. "Those documents are entirely fake!" Darius screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek that completely betrayed his terror. "Do not look at those screens. Maya is completely unhinged. She is a deeply jealous, mentally unstable, and totally barren woman who is aggressively trying to destroy my historic success. I filed for divorce this morning because she is totally toxic, and now she is maliciously fabricating these emails to seek pathetic revenge against a successful black man. She is lying to all of you." He stepped away from the podium, aggressively waving his arms and desperately searching the front tables for any friendly faces. He zeroed in on a group of men sitting near the stage, his former college fraternity brothers, who had always eagerly enabled his arrogant behavior. Darius actively tried to leverage their deep unspoken bond, loudly demanding their absolute loyalty in his darkest moment. "Brothers, you know exactly who I am," Darius shouted, directly addressing the men in the tailored suits. "We built this powerful network together. We stand for real loyalty and unbreakable brotherhood. Are you really going to let this crazy, bitter woman walk in here and ruin one of your own kings? Tell them she is lying. Tell them I am a man of high honor and immense corporate integrity." The fraternity brothers exchanged highly uncomfortable, deeply panicked glances. They were successful, wealthy men who fiercely protected their own corporate reputations above absolutely everything else. They looked at the glowing screens, reading the undeniable, legally binding confession of federal wire fraud brightly displayed behind Darius. Then they looked at my imposing, highly trained private security detail and the elite team of sharp-suited federal auditors standing firmly by my side. They immediately realized that actively defending Darius tonight meant aggressively tying themselves to a sinking criminal ship. One by one, the fraternity brothers slowly turned their heads away, aggressively refusing to make eye contact with the desperate, sweating man on the stage. They entirely abandoned him, completely choosing their own corporate survival over his toxic, fraudulent brotherhood. Darius stared at his former friends, absolute crushing betrayal washing over his panicked face. I was completely, utterly alone on that massive stage. I did not let the suffocating silence linger. I walked gracefully toward the front of the room, my emerald gown sweeping elegantly across the plush carpet. I calmly reached out and took a microphone from a nearby floor stand. I did not yell. I did not sound frantic or bitter. I spoke with the smooth, lethal, and absolute authority of a woman who was entirely in control of the execution. "You speak so passionately about building generational wealth," Darius, I said, my voice echoing powerfully through the grand ballroom, commanding the absolute attention of every single person present. "Let us talk honestly about exactly how you built yours. Let us show this esteemed audience the absolute, undeniable truth behind your flawless tailored suits and your incredibly empty bank accounts." I made another subtle, sharp hand signal to my sound engineer in the back booth. The massive screens behind Darius instantly shifted again, aggressively wiping away the emails and replacing them with a highly detailed, deeply complex financial spreadsheet. The data was meticulously highlighted in bright, undeniable red ink. I turned to directly address the elite silent crowd. "For the past 3 long years, Darius Sterling has been aggressively using my professional commercial appraisal license to actively commit massive corporate fraud," I announced clearly. "He has been systematically forging my certified signature to artificially, illegally inflate the value of his clients' commercial properties. He actively borrowed millions of dollars against those fake inflated assets to personally fund his lavish fake lifestyle, his young mistress's rented penthouse, and his mother's highly excessive luxury shopping habits. He is not a wealthy, successful advisor. He is a desperate broke criminal who has been actively stealing from his own elite clients to maintain a pathetic illusion of power." The crowd let out another massive collective gasp. Investors began frantically pulling out their smartphones aggressively, texting their own lawyers and financial advisors to immediately check their corporate portfolios. The sheer terrifying reality that Darius had actively stolen their money finally hit the room like a physical shockwave. Darius stared at the damning financial spreadsheets glowing brightly on the screens behind him. His mind completely snapped. The last remaining shred of his sanity entirely evaporated under the crushing public humiliation. He let out a loud, unhinged, maniacal laugh that echoed disturbingly through the grand ballroom. He gripped his hair, pacing wildly across the stage, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of professional decorum. "You cannot prove any of this," Maya Darius screamed, laughing hysterically into the microphone. "You are completely bluffing. It is your certified signature on those official appraisals. It is your professional license stamped on every single one of those commercial documents. If I go down for this, you go down with me. We are legally married. You are completely implicated in this massive federal fraud. You are just as guilty as I am, and I will gladly drag you into a federal prison cell right alongside me." His desperate, unhinged threat hung heavily in the tense, silent air of the ballroom. He truly believed he had finally found the ultimate, undeniable loophole. He thought his aggressive forgery had successfully tied my pristine professional reputation to his massive, sinking criminal enterprise. He thought I was foolishly executing a mutual suicide pact. I stood perfectly still, letting his manic, desperate laughter echo through the room. I slowly raised the microphone back to my lips. My polite smile completely vanished, instantly replaced by a look of deadly, absolute, chilling promise. "That brings us directly to Monday morning's emergency board meeting, Darius," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy register. "You really should have paid much closer attention to exactly who acquired the majority shares of your wealth management firm last quarter." The manic laughter abruptly died in Darius's throat. He stared at me, his eyes wide with sudden absolute confusion and rapidly mounting terror. I turned my back on him, completely dismissing his pathetic existence in front of the entire elite city. I gracefully handed the microphone back to my lead security officer and smoothly walked straight out of the grand ballroom, my head held incredibly high. My elite team of auditors followed directly behind me, leaving Darius entirely trapped on that brightly lit stage, completely surrounded by furious, wealthy investors who were absolutely ready to tear him apart. The spectacular public takedown was totally complete, but the absolute final devastating federal payoff was still eagerly waiting for him on Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with the heavy, suffocating humidity typical of Atlanta. But Darius Sterling felt completely insulated from the reality of his impending doom. The spectacular public takedown at the gala had been a devastating blow to his ego, but his toxic arrogance refused to let him accept absolute defeat. He firmly believed the entire disaster was simply a temporary public relations hurdle. In his deeply delusional mind, he had already formulated the perfect bulletproof strategy to survive the morning. He was going to completely throw me under the bus. He planned to march directly into the corporate boardroom of Pinnacle Wealth Management and confidently deliver a masterclass in emotional manipulation to the executive board. Vivian stood right behind him in his newly rented hotel suite, meticulously smoothing the broad shoulders of his tailored suit jacket. Despite being publicly evicted and humiliated at her country club just days prior, Vivian clung desperately to her manufactured sense of superiority. She had spent the entire weekend actively coaching Darius on exactly how to destroy my character in front of his wealthy corporate peers. She weaponized the deeply ingrained, incredibly toxic classist tropes she had worshipped her entire life. You are going to tell that board of directors that Maya is nothing but a desperate, unstable woman from the South Side, Vivian instructed him, her voice dripping with absolute venom. You will confidently explain that she was entirely intimidated by your massive success. You will tell them she maliciously forged those commercial appraisals herself in a pathetic, unhinged attempt to trap a wealthy provider because she knew you were finally preparing to leave her for a woman of proper breeding. They will believe you, Darius. Corporate men always protect their own. They know exactly how crazy and jealous working-class women can become when they are faced with losing their luxurious lifestyle. You just need to sell the story of the victimized, successful black man who was targeted by a gold-digging fraud. Darius absorbed his mother's toxic advice like a sponge, his chest puffing out with renewed, completely false confidence. He truly believed his polished fraternity charm and his history of generating high commissions would easily override the undeniable digital evidence I had displayed on those massive ballroom screens. He gathered his leather briefcase, motioned for Vivian and his remaining loyal junior associate Jamal to follow him, and confidently drove to the sleek downtown high-rise that housed his firm. He intended to walk in there and immediately demand my arrest for corporate sabotage. When he pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors of the Pinnacle Wealth Management lobby, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. The usual bustling morning energy of junior brokers and wealth advisors was completely absent. The pristine bullpen was entirely silent. The few employees who were present stood rigidly near their cubicles, aggressively avoiding any eye contact with him. Darius misinterpreted their absolute terror as mere awkwardness regarding the weekend gossip. He flashed his signature bright smile, completely blind to the fact that the firm's internal servers had already been locked down by federal authorities hours before he even woke up. He walked with a practiced, powerful stride straight down the long executive corridor, flanked closely by his mother and his junior associate. Darius was actively rehearsing his opening line, fully expecting to see Charles Montgomery, the firm's stern managing director, sitting anxiously at the head of the long oak table surrounded by worried corporate board members. He expected to walk into a room of peers who would eagerly listen to his fabricated tale of a jealous, vindictive wife trying to ruin his prominent legacy. He reached out, grabbed the polished brass handles of the heavy mahogany boardroom doors, and forcefully pushed them wide open with a dramatic, commanding flourish. The aggressive speech died instantly in his throat. The heavy leather briefcase slipped right out of Jamal's sweating hands and hit the polished floor with a loud, echoing thud. Vivian gasped loudly, stumbling backward and grabbing the wooden doorframe to keep herself from completely collapsing. Charles Montgomery was nowhere to be seen. The corporate board members were completely absent. Instead, I was sitting perfectly still in the massive, high-backed leather chairman's seat at the very head of the long oak table. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit radiating absolute lethal authority. Standing silently along the walls of the expansive boardroom were 6 men and women wearing dark suits and stern expressions, their hands resting casually near their waistbands. They were not corporate security guards. They did not look like local police officers. They possessed the undeniable, terrifying aura of federal agents who had arrived to completely dismantle a criminal enterprise. The room felt freezing cold, chilled by the absolute finality of the trap I had flawlessly executed. Darius froze completely in the doorway, his confident posture immediately crumbling into a stance of sheer, unfiltered panic. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin looking incredibly ashen and sickly under the bright fluorescent boardroom lights. His mouth opened and closed several times, struggling to formulate a coherent sentence as his brain desperately tried to process the impossible scene unfolding directly in front of him. "What are you doing in my chairman's seat?" Darius finally stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate sound that lacked any trace of his usual booming arrogance. "How did you get past building security? You have absolutely no right to be in this restricted executive area. I am calling Charles right now to have you forcefully removed from the premises." I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I simply leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the smooth surface of the polished oak table, and calmly steepled my fingers together. I looked at him with profound, chilling indifference, watching the absolute terror completely consume his rational mind. "I told you at the gala, Darius," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a sharply honed blade. "You confidently forged my professional signature on dozens of highly sensitive commercial real estate appraisals. You foolishly used my pristine, highly respected credentials to artificially inflate the value of your clients' properties so you could illegally borrow against them to fund your fake luxury lifestyle and your mother's ridiculous shopping habits." Vivian pushed her way past Jamal, her face twisted into a mask of bitter, desperate rage. "Do not listen to her, Darius," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. "You tell these security guards the absolute truth right now. Tell them she is a desperate, barren woman who forged those documents herself to keep you trapped in a miserable marriage. Tell them she is trying to frame you because she knows you are moving on to a better, more refined woman who can actually give this prominent family a proper heir." I completely ignored Vivian's pathetic, hysterical outburst. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the sweating, terrified man standing at the end of the table. "You truly thought you were a brilliant mastermind, Darius," I continued smoothly. "You thought your working-class wife was too clueless and unrefined to ever understand the complex financial maneuvers you were executing right under my nose. You firmly believed your mother's toxic rhetoric, that I was simply a gullible woman blindly mesmerized by your fake black excellence." Darius swallowed incredibly hard, sweat beading heavily on his forehead. "You cannot prove anything," he hissed, desperately clinging to his final, rapidly sinking lifeline. "Those documents have your official signature on them. Your certified appraisal stamp is on every single page. If I go down for this alleged corporate fraud, you are going down right alongside me. You are legally implicated in this entire operation." A slow, deadly smile completely transformed my face. The absolute trap was now fully permanently sprung. "But what you did not know, Darius," I said, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy whisper, "is that exactly 1 year ago, I noticed the massive financial discrepancies hidden deep within your client portfolios. I did not confront you. I did not demand a divorce. I quietly took every single forged document, every altered ledger, and every illegal wire transfer record, and I reported them directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Darius stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. His knees buckled slightly and he had to grab the edge of the heavy boardroom table to keep from collapsing onto the floor. The SEC. The acronym echoed in his mind like a definitive death sentence. He looked wildly at the 6 silent individuals standing along the boardroom walls, finally realizing exactly who they were and why they were standing inside his firm. "You reported your own husband to federal authorities." He choked out, absolute horror radiating from his wide, panicked eyes. "You completely destroyed my entire career over a few altered documents." I slowly reached inside the breast pocket of my charcoal blazer. I pulled out a solid leather credential wallet. I did not toss it. I did not throw it. I placed it firmly on the polished oak table and smoothly slid it across the long surface. The leather wallet glided perfectly down the center of the table, stopping exactly 1 inch from Darius's trembling fingertips. The wallet was flipped open, clearly displaying a heavy, solid gold federal badge and a highly secure government identification card. Vantage Holdings is not just a massive private investment firm, Darius. I announced, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable, shattering power. We are a highly specialized, independent auditing contractor, officially hired by the federal government. I am the lead federal appraiser, explicitly assigned by the SEC to meticulously investigate your corrupt wealth management firm. Every single move you made over the last 12 months has been actively monitored, legally recorded, and officially certified by my team for federal prosecution. Darius stared down at the gleaming federal badge. His entire fake empire, his carefully curated social status, his stolen money, and his arrogant pride were all instantly, permanently eradicated. He was not just facing a bitter divorce. He was facing decades inside a federal penitentiary. I stood up slowly from the chairman's seat, buttoning my suit jacket with total unbreakable composure. I looked down at the broken, ruined man who had arrogantly told me to take my cheap car and vacate his legacy estate just 1 week ago. I have not been your wife for a year, Darius. I concluded, watching the federal agent step forward to place him in heavy steel handcuffs. I have been your auditor. The sheer weight of that terrifying realization hit Darius with the brutal physical force of a collapsing building. His knees, trembling violently beneath the expensive fabric of his tailored designer suit, finally gave out completely. He slumped heavily against the smooth, polished edge of the massive oak table, his chest heaving as his breath came in short, ragged, desperate gasps. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he aggressively controlled, was nothing but a meticulously crafted, devastating illusion. The expansive luxury house in Buckhead that he loudly bragged about at elite fraternity networking events, the joint bank accounts he thought he dominated, the powerful professional reputation he wielded like a heavy club against anyone he deemed beneath him. Every single piece of his glamorous life had been a carefully laid, inescapable trap designed specifically to gather irrefutable federal evidence. I had spent 12 long, grueling months watching his every move, tracking every forged signature and documenting every stolen dollar. I had played the role of the quiet, unassuming working-class wife with absolute terrifying perfection, silently gathering the digital rope he was so eagerly using to hang himself. He had spent years aggressively mocking my lack of pedigree and practical work boots, completely blind to the undeniable fact that he was sleeping right next to the very federal contractor assigned to dismantle his fraudulent existence. The absolute silence in the corporate boardroom was broken only by the pathetic sound of his rapid, panicked breathing. He looked at me not as a man looking at his devoted wife, but as a trapped, cornered animal staring directly at its cold, unfeeling executioner. Just as the terrifying gravity of his impending imprisonment settled over the room, the heavy mahogany boardroom doors swung open much wider. A secondary team of highly trained federal agents, wearing dark navy windbreakers, with bright yellow FBI lettering emblazoned across the back, stepped inside in perfect, intimidating synchronization. They moved with terrifying practiced efficiency, immediately securing the exits, seizing the junior associates' mobile phones, and locking down the entire executive floor. I stood up slowly from the plush leather chairman's seat, taking my time to gracefully smooth the fabric of my charcoal skirt. I wanted him to feel every agonizing second of this absolute destruction. I walked around the massive oak table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and stopped just inches from his sweating, terrified face. "Darius Sterling," I said, making sure my voice carried loudly enough for the entire gathered crowd outside the glass walls to hear. "You are officially under federal investigation for massive wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and systematically forging federal appraisal documents." I watched his face contort in pure, unfiltered agony as I clearly recited the devastating charges. "You really thought you were a brilliant criminal mastermind, Darius. But you were incredibly, remarkably sloppy. The massive, highly illegal wire transfer you frantically made on Thursday afternoon while sitting in your leased car was the final, undeniable piece of digital evidence we desperately needed to secure these arrest warrants." You literally handed us the final nail for your own coffin. You stole from the federal government, and you arrogantly left your digital fingerprints on every single transaction. Vivian completely lost what little remained of her fragile status-obsessed mind. The pristine, untouchable social facade she had ruthlessly protected for decades violently shattered right in front of the federal authorities and her son's corporate peers. She let out a shrill, blood-curdling scream that echoed piercingly down the long executive corridor. She lunged aggressively across the polished oak table, her hands hooked into desperate manicured claws, aiming directly for my face. "You ruined him!" she shrieked, spit flying from her trembling pale lips, as two massive federal agents swiftly intercepted her, grabbing her arms and forcing her roughly back into a leather guest chair. "You are a wicked, jealous barren demon. You completely ruined my perfect, brilliant son. You set him up because you were never good enough for this prestigious family." I did not even flinch or step back. I just stared down at her with profound, chilling pity. Right at that chaotic moment, Kiara aggressively pushed her way through the dense crowd of stunned junior employees gathered outside the glass boardroom walls. She was hyperventilating, staring down at her expensive smartphone with wide, terrified, tear-filled eyes. Her phone was buzzing continuously with rapid, relentless digital notifications. Every single bank account tied to the Sterling family name, every hidden trust, every extended credit line, and every offshore reserve had just been officially permanently seized by the federal government. Kiara burst into loud, ugly, uncontrollable tears, sliding slowly down the smooth glass wall and collapsing into a miserable heap on the carpeted floor as she realized she was entirely permanently destitute. The public humiliation of the Sterling family was still not entirely complete. Tasha had stubbornly followed Darius to the corporate office this morning, standing nervously in the pristine reception area, desperately hoping to secure a massive cash payout before permanently abandoning him for a wealthier prospect. She aggressively pushed her way to the front of the gathered crowd, just in time to see Darius being forcefully spun around and pressed hard against the boardroom wall by the lead FBI agent. Tasha took one single terrifying look at the imposing federal windbreakers, the heavy tactical gear, and the total absolute destruction of her supposedly wealthy, untouchable provider. She did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She rapidly calculated her miserable odds, turned sharply on her expensive high heels, pushed aggressively past a terrified junior broker, and literally sprinted toward the emergency exit stairwell. She abandoned Darius to his miserable, inescapable fate without a single backward glance, desperate to avoid being implicated in his massive federal crimes. Inside the boardroom, the lead federal agent pulled a pair of heavy solid steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. He grabbed Darius's trembling wrists, pulling them sharply behind his back. The loud metallic click echoed sharply through the quiet boardroom, a harsh, definitive sound that officially marked the absolute, undeniable end of the Sterling family's fake, fraudulent empire. Darius watched his glamorous mistress run away like a terrified coward, his chest heaving with desperate, unfiltered panic. He twisted awkwardly in the federal agent's unyielding grip, his tear-filled eyes frantically searching the room for his mother. "Mom, you have to help me," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched, desperate whine. "Call the regional director. Call our prestigious church committee. Do something to stop this." But Vivian could not do absolutely anything. The overwhelming, crushing shock of her beloved golden son being hauled away in federal handcuffs, combined with the absolute realization of her total, inescapable financial ruin, was finally too much for her fragile, arrogant system to handle. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she fainted completely dead away, slumping awkwardly out of the leather chair and falling directly into Kiara's trembling, helpless arms. The lead agent firmly gripped Darius by the shoulder, shoving him roughly toward the heavy boardroom doors. As he was being aggressively led away, entirely stripped of his fake wealth, his stolen house, and his incredibly toxic pride, Darius dug his expensive leather shoes into the carpet. He looked back at me over his shoulder, hot tears streaming down his face in a mask of pure, pathetic desperation. "Maya, please," he pleaded, his voice echoing through the silent, stunned office. We were building an empire together. I stared at the broken, fraudulent man I had once mistakenly loved. My smile was as cold and unforgiving as solid ice. "No, Darius," I replied, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any mercy. "I built the empire. You were just a bad investment I finally decided to liquidate." 6 months have passed since the federal agents escorted my arrogant ex-husband out of his own shattered corporate boardroom in heavy steel handcuffs. The swift, brutal, and unforgiving justice of the federal court system operates with a terrifying efficiency when presented with an airtight mountain of certified forensic evidence. Darius Sterling did not even manage to make it to a public trial. His newly appointed overworked public defender took one terrified look at the massive digital wire transfer logs and strongly advised him to immediately accept a comprehensive plea deal. He is currently serving a mandatory 8-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary located far outside the glamorous city limits of Atlanta. His beloved fraternity brothers, the wealthy, influential men he once desperately tried to impress, completely disowned him the exact second his tearful mugshot hit the local evening news broadcasts. They aggressively erased his tainted name from their exclusive alumni directories and coldly blocked his desperate collect calls from prison, ruthlessly protecting their own prestigious corporate reputations from his toxic criminal fallout. He sits alone in a tiny freezing concrete cell today, entirely stripped of his expensive tailored designer suits and his manufactured arrogance, left with absolutely nothing but the crushing daily realization that his insatiable greed permanently destroyed his entire life. The devastating reality facing his mother and sister is arguably even more poetic. Vivian and Kiara were violently stripped of the stolen church funds they used to aggressively fund their counterfeit luxury lifestyle. The federal authorities seized everything of value, freezing their remaining accounts and permanently repossessing their leased vehicles. With their elite social standing completely obliterated and Vivian facing her own severe legal consequences for the church embezzlement, they were entirely banished from the wealthy Atlanta suburbs. Today, they live together in a tiny, cramped, unglamorous one-bedroom apartment located deep in the very heart of the South Side neighborhood they once so arrogantly mocked. Kiara spends her days aggressively arguing with bill collectors on a prepaid mobile phone, her counterfeit designer handbags long sold to a local pawn shop just to keep their electricity running. Vivian, the former esteemed president of the High Society Church Committee, now works the grueling graveyard shift at a 24-hour public laundromat. She spends her miserable nights quietly folding other people's cheap clothing under harsh, flickering fluorescent lights, desperately trying to hide her face whenever a former country club acquaintance happens to walk past the large glass windows. Their brutal descent into absolute poverty is a stunning daily reminder of the devastating price of toxic entitlement. I stepped out onto the sprawling glass balcony of my newly acquired breathtaking penthouse located at the very pinnacle of the Buckhead skyline. The crisp evening wind gently brushed against my skin as I looked out over the glittering, vibrant lights of Atlanta, stretching endlessly toward the dark horizon. I took a slow, deeply satisfying breath, feeling a profound sense of absolute unbreakable peace radiating through my entire body. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming wife, aggressively hiding her immense power in the dark shadows to protect a fragile male ego. I was fully and publicly standing in my own brilliant light. Tonight, my magnificent penthouse is completely filled with the joyous, confident laughter of 50 young, brilliant, incredibly ambitious Black women. I am hosting an exclusive high-level networking masterclass specifically designed for emerging female leaders in the commercial finance and real estate sectors. I walk through the crowded, elegant rooms, actively teaching these phenomenal women exactly how to build real, impenetrable generational wealth entirely independent of toxic men and outdated patriarchal expectations. I am showing them how to ruthlessly secure their own financial freedom, how to properly read complex corporate appraisal ledgers, and how to permanently protect their hard-earned assets from anyone who tries to diminish their incredible worth. The gentle clinking of expensive crystal glasses echoed beautifully through the massive living room as my private catering team seamlessly navigated the joyful crowd. Right in the center of the bustling room, wearing a stiff, highly uncomfortable black uniform, is Julian Pierce, the notoriously ruthless senior law partner who once arrogantly tried to force me into a pathetic divorce settlement is now actively walking around my private party, silently serving hot hors d'oeuvres to my esteemed guests from a polished silver tray. His prestigious law firm barely survived the devastating fallout of the federal investigation, suffering a massive, humiliating loss of its most lucrative corporate clients. To keep his struggling business afloat and avoid my total financial wrath, he effectively functions as my own glorified, highly overpaid personal assistant. He awkwardly offers a delicate crab tartlet to a young female financial analyst, his eyes strictly cast downward in absolute, undeniable submission. He knows exactly who holds the real power in this city, and he will spend the rest of his miserable professional career aggressively bowing to my every single command. I walked back toward the edge of my sprawling balcony, feeling the warm, heavy glass of a crystal champagne flute resting perfectly in my right hand. The city lights of Atlanta sparkled below me like millions of tiny, brilliant diamonds scattered across a massive sea of black velvet. I thought about the terrified, sweating man locked inside a federal prison cell, and the disgraced, exhausted woman folding laundry in a cheap laundromat on the south side. I thought about the beautiful, unbothered freedom of finally claiming my own absolute destiny. I took one final, incredibly satisfying look at the beautiful horizon before I slowly raised my glass of expensive vintage champagne high into the cool, rushing night air, offering a silent, deeply triumphant toast to the dazzling city lights, brilliantly illuminating the vast, sprawling darkness directly below me. They told me I was nothing but a working-class girl who did not fit into their world of black excellence. They were right. I did not fit into their world. So I bought it, dismantled it, and built my own.